Welcome back to the Shakespeare Showdown show. This is episode number 2 and round 2 of the Romeo and Juliet Showdown. In our first episode, we introduced our 10 contestants, and we looked at the first half of Act 1, Scene 1, and we made our first elimination. In this episode, we will be looking at our remaining 9 contestants, and we will be meeting our 2 title characters. Romeo, who first appears in the second half of Act 1, Scene 1, and Juliet, who first appears in Act 1, Scene 3. Romeo and Juliet don't appear in the same scene together until Act 1, Scene 5, and because they are introduced separately in the play, they will be introduced separately in this tournament. With 9 different versions of the play that we now have to consider, and 18 total title characters that we need to examine, not to mention the various side characters that we'll meet today, both fictional and historical, we have our work cut out for us. The program for this episode's proceedings will be as follows. First, we'll introduce all 9 Romeos, and we'll have an analysis about them, and then we'll do all 9 Juliets, and we'll have an analysis about them. And after we have done that, we'll make a final determination on which contestant should be eliminated in this round. So let's dive right in, starting with the Romeos. In the last episode, we went in chronological order. This time, we're going to do it a little differently. We're going to do it by category, starting with the category of television. And we have 2 television contestants to look at, which are the 1976 Thames version and the 1978 BBC version. We'll start with the 1976 Thames, which is a good place to start because, as we mentioned last time, this version of the play is the most unabridged version that we have. As I already mentioned, it is in the second half of the first scene of the first act when we first meet Romeo. In this part of the scene, Romeo is having a conversation with his cousin Benvolio. This is going to be Romeo here in the foreground with Benvolio in the background. Their conversation is a conversation about love, of which Romeo is suffering an unrequited case. We're going to be looking at 3 different parts by Romeo. In the first part, Romeo is speaking about love and hate, and he employs a heavy amount of metaphor and oxymoron. The part that we'll focus on specifically will be these 8 lines here, starting with the line, "Here's much to do with hate, but more with love." So let's go ahead and listen to this first part. Romeo is being played by Christopher Neame here. He will be facing away from the camera for most of this, but that's okay. We'll see more of him in a minute. Let's listen.
There's much to do with hate, but more with love. Why then, oh brawling love, oh loving hate, oh anything of nothing first create, oh heavy lightness, serious vanity, misshapen chaos of well-seeming forms, feather of lead, bright smoke, cold fire, still waking sleep, that is not what it is. This love feel I that feel no love in this.
Alright, so that was the first example of the first part of our study, and we already have one mistake, which is the sound of crickets in the background. This scene is supposed to take place at 9 o'clock in the morning, which is much too late for crickets. A minor mistake, but a mistake nonetheless. In the next part, Romeo and Benvolio are continuing their conversation, and Romeo brings in some smoke and fire imagery, which will be these 9 lines here that look like this, starting with the line, "Griefs of mine own lie heavy in my breast." Now, in the opinion of the Shakespeare Showdown show, this part contains what is Romeo's best couple of lines in the scene, which are the lines, "Love is a smoke made with a fume of sighs, being purged, a fire sparkling in lovers' eyes." So remember these lines because we're going to pay extra special attention to them in this analysis. Let's go ahead and listen to how this whole part sounds, starting from the top.
Griefs of mine own lie heavy in my breast, which thou wilt propagate to have it pressed with more of thine. This love that thou hast shown doth add more grief to too much of mine own. Love is a smoke made with a fume of sighs, being purged a fire sparkling in lovers' eyes, being vexed a sea nourished with lovers' tears. What is it else? A madness most discreet, a choking gall and a preserving sweet.
Okay, and in the third part that we'll be studying by Romeo, we have Romeo speaking again, and here he is complaining specifically about the woman that he loves and the path of chastity that she has chosen. Benvolio will set him up with the line, "A right fair mark, fair coz, is soonest hit," and then we get Romeo's response. And we'll be focusing on his next 4 lines only, which are these 4 lines here that look like this. Romeo gives us some more figurative language, this time the image of Cupid's arrow. Let's go ahead and listen to this part, starting with Benvolio.
I aimed so near when I supposed you loved.
A right good marksman, and she's fair, I love.
A right fair mark, fair coz, is soonest hit.
Well, in that hit you miss. She'll not be hit with Cupid's arrow, she hath Dian's wit. And in strong proof of chastity, well armed from love's weak childish bow, she lives uncharmed.
So, having heard all 3 parts, what do we have to say, besides the crickets? Well, as mentioned before, this is our most unabridged version of the play. However, it isn't a perfectly unabridged version, because if you noticed, there was an omission of the words sick health in the 6th line of the first part. At the end of the line, feather of lead, bright smoke, cold fire, sick health. So this is what the speech actually looked like for this version. Let's go ahead and listen to that part once again, just this line.
Feather of lead, bright smoke, cold fire, still waking sleep.
Now, in the first episode of the show, we made the general guideline that, generally speaking, cutting things out of the play isn't necessarily a critical error, and we are going to stand by that guideline for the most part. This contest isn't intended to be a contest of which version of the play is the least abridged. If that was the only point, we could just count all the lines and be done with it. What matters, as we said, is what's being cut. So what's being cut out here? In this case, it's not even a full line that's missing, just 2 words. Sick health. 2 syllables, in fact. These are hardly the most important words in the scene. I would venture to say that most people watching wouldn't even notice if they didn't have the text in front of them. However, in this round, in the analysis that we're going to do on the character Romeo, we want to have extremely high standards. And the omission of these 2 words, we are going to say, even though it's not a critical error, is an undesirable error, because it ruins the otherwise perfect 10-syllable per line meter. I'm almost tempted to say that it might be better to omit the entire line than to omit merely one part of it. I'm not saying that, but I'm tempted to. The reason I'm not saying that is because the line still includes some great oxymorons. So the fragmented line is still a better option than if the entire line was missing. The best option of all would be to leave the line untampered with and have Romeo speak the speech the way it's written, which I'm sure Hamlet would agree with. So, this is another minor grievance like the crickets, but it's a grievance nonetheless. As a consequence, because of the extra high standards that we want to be implemented for Romeo, we are going to go ahead and make the 1976 Thames TV movie our first elimination nominee of the day, for the sin of ruining a perfectly good 10-syllable line, and also robbing us of one extra oxymoron. I promise we'll be holding our other Romeos to the same expectations. So, let's now move on to our next contestant, which will give us something to compare and contrast. In the 1978 BBC TV movie, Romeo and Benvolio are in more of a garden setting, as you can see. This is a little more accurate, as it's supposed to be a grove of sycamore trees. This will be Patrick Reichart as Romeo. Benvolio is the one with the bloody bandage on his hand. This contestant, remember, was the one that had the bloody baby in the last episode. We'll start at the same spot as before. This is what the text will look like, and there's already a red flag. We actually have this time an entire line that's missing. Still waking sleep, that is not what it is. Let's listen to how this sounds.
For I've heard it all, here's much to do with hate, but more with love. Why then, O brawling love, O loving hate, O anything of nothing first create, O heavy lightness, serious vanity, misshapen chaos of well-seeming forms, feather of lead, bright smoke, cold fire, sick health, this love feel I that feel no love in this.
Notice the birds chirping? Much more appropriate than the crickets. Also, I think the bloody bandage is a nice touch, even if it reminds us of the bloody baby. So that's the first part. Moving on to the second part, here we see a 4-line segment that's missing. There's also one small difference in the text that you'll notice between this version and the 76, and that is that Romeo here says smoke raised instead of smoke made. He says love is a smoke raised with the fume of sighs. The Thames said made. This version says raised. The reason for this is because raised is what's printed in the 1597 Q1 text, and made is what's printed in the 1599 Q2 text. The choice here is mostly a matter of preference, and the Shakespeare Showdown show doesn't have a strong preference one way or the other, because the meaning doesn't change as far as we're concerned, but I suppose we lean slightly in the favor of raised. So let's go ahead and listen to how raised sounds.
Love is a smoke raised with the fume of sighs, being purged a fire sparkling in lovers' eyes, being vexed a sea nourished with loving tears. What is it else? A madness most discreet, a choking gall, and a preserving sweet.
So that's how that sounds. Finally, the third part. We have something that looks like this. Let's listen to how this sounds.
I aimed so near when I supposed you loved.
A right good markman, and she's fair, I love.
A right fair mark fair, cuz is soonest hit.
Oh, well, in that hit you miss, she'll not be hit with Cupid's arrow.
Then she hath sworn that she will still live chaste.
She hath?
So this version, unfortunately, is also guilty of ruining a perfectly good 10-syllable line by removing the words, she hath Diane's wit. And not only does it ruin a perfectly good 10-syllable line, but it also robs us of a perfectly good rhyme of hit and wit. It also removes a classical allusion. I can't understand why they would do such a thing to us. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Could they possibly just be trying to save a couple of seconds? You may possibly think that the abridgments make it easier for the actors to give them less to memorize, but I actually believe that keeping the rhymes and keeping a consistent meter would be the easiest for the actors. In any case, if we're going to punish the Thames for ruining a line and removing an oxymoron, then we must also punish the BBC for ruining a line, removing a perfectly good rhyme, and for removing a perfectly good classical allusion, which is all very disappointing. So the 1978 BBC version is now our second elimination nominee of the day. And after only 2 examinations, we are now 2 for 2 in making elimination nominees. By the way, just to go on a very brief tangent, we mentioned during the second part of this the possible difference between smoke raised and smoke made. Well, there also exists the possibility of the word urged being used instead of the word purged in the very next line. The main proponent of this being the 18th century editor Dr. Samuel Johnson. Dr. Johnson argued that urging a fire makes more sense than purging a fire, because to urge a fire means to stoke it, whereas to purge a fire, while possibly meaning to extinguish it, wasn't really a phrase used anywhere at all. The problem with this is that it's a different situation than the smoke made versus smoke raised situation. Smoke made and smoke raised are both considered valid options because of the fact that both appear in early printed text of the play. As I said, Raised is from the 1597 and made is from the 1599. That isn't what's at play regarding purged versus urged. The word as it appears in both the 1597 and the 1599 is purged. Dr. Johnson and his followers argue for urged purely because they think urged is a better word. This is tricky territory for us, because in the last episode we made the rule that it's okay to cut out parts of the play. We said it's okay to cut out words, to cut out lines, to cut out characters, and to cut out whole scenes. Well, in the case of urged versus purged, what's being cut out is only a single letter. So what do we have to say about this? We're going to say that switching purged to urged is in fact an inappropriate alteration to make. Because even though it's seemingly only cutting and not adding, it is actually adding, because cutting one letter from a word is the same as writing a whole new word. By editing purged to urged, Johnson is writing his version of the play, which he believes is better than the play Shakespeare wrote, as best we can tell. And once you start doing that, you might as well just write your own story from scratch if you think you're so smart. Now, to be fair to Dr. Johnson, it was probably his belief, although an unsubstantiated one, that Shakespeare originally wrote urged, and that urged got corrupted to purged in the printing process, and that reverting it back to urged is a necessary action to restore it to what Shakespeare originally wrote. It's an interesting hypothesis, but again, a totally unsubstantiated one, except for the vague feeling that urged is better and Shakespeare must have written the better thing. But because there's no evidence, it's still an inappropriate action. It's impossible to know if urged was corrupted to purged, or if it is in fact Dr. Johnson who's the one doing the corrupting, by switching it from purged to urged. None of our contestants, by the way, follow Dr. Johnson's advocation for urged. They all say purged, if they include that line at all, which the Shakespeare Showdown show agrees with. The moral of the story, I suppose, is that if you want to alter the text in any way, in an effort to improve the play written by William Shakespeare, then you better get your alterations in early. Also, the Shakespeare Showdown show disagrees that urged is the better word anyway. It might make some sense in a certain regard, but purged is still favorable, if for no other reason than because it foreshadows another line that will come later in the play, which we'll talk about a little bit later in this episode. Anyway, with that tangent over, let's move on. At this point in time, we'll now move on to our next category, which will be our 4 stage versions of the play. We'll start with the 1992 version by the Stratford Festival in Stratford, Ontario, Canada. Here we see Romeo in the pink shirt with no jacket. Benvolio is the one who is wearing a jacket. This is going to be Anthony Simolino playing Romeo. The dialogue here would look like this. This will be our most heavily abridged version yet, and we are left with only 2 lines to hear from this first part, and we're missing all of Romeo's oxymorons from this part, which is already very disappointing. Let's go ahead and make our disappointment official by listening to it.
Here's much to do with hate, but more with love. This love feel I feel no love in this.
Moving on to the second part, let's hope we have more to work with there. The dialogue for the second part looks like this, and our hope was in vain, obviously. Here we have less than 2 whole lines, including a partial line. We also have the omission of the love is a smoke line that we had designated as possibly Romeo's best. This is now totally off the rails and turning into a complete disaster. Let's make the disaster official and listen to the line and a half that they actually did decide to give us. This is what it sounds like.
This love that thou hast shown to that more grief to too much of mine own. Farewell.
I will say, before moving on to the third part, that in defense of this contestant, as a whole, this version of the play does contain a mostly satisfactory treatment of the text, in the sense that it ends up running about 2 hours and 42 minutes in length, which isn't bad if you're looking for a nice, long, relatively full version of the play. It's just that this scene in particular gets a heavy abridgment, which they probably did in the interest of saving more time for other areas. So I think that's fair to point out. But they did in fact remove the line that we designated as the best line, and they disfigured the lines that they did decide to give us, so we've seen more than enough. The 1992 Stratford Festival play is now our third elimination nominee of the day, which makes us now 3 for 3, even before getting to the third part of the scene. But moving on to the third part, to their credit, they did leave this part fully intact. So let's at least do them the respect of listening to this.
I aimed so near when I supposed you loved. A right good marksman, and she's fair I love.
A right fair mark, fair cuz, is soonest hit.
Well, in that hit, you miss. Shall not be hit with Cupid's arrow. She hath Diane's wit, and in strong proof of chastity well armed, from love's weak, childish bow she lives unharmed.
Alright, a couple quick things with this. Notice how much better it is to complete the rhyme hit and wit, which the BBC didn't do. And once again, I think leaving the rhyme intact and including all 20 syllables actually makes it easier to perform. Even though it's more to say, it's easier to memorize and to recite. Also, there's one more difference that needs to be pointed out. In the Thames version of this part, we heard Romeo say, "From love's weak childish bow she lives uncharmed." The BBC cut that line out entirely. In this version, the Stratford, Romeo says, "From love's weak childish bow she lives unharmed." Unharmed instead of uncharmed, which is yet another example of a difference of only one letter. However, this variation is a valid one because of the fact that unharmed appears in the 1597 Q1 text and uncharmed appears in the 1599 Q2 text. Not to go on a whole nother tangent here, but there is some pretty hefty scholarly debate surrounding uncharmed versus unharmed, with a lot of very strong preferences involved, even though all it amounts to is preferences. The preferences mostly have to do with unharmed being more reverential toward Queen Elizabeth I, Queen Elizabeth I being an unmarried queen. So in choosing between unharmed and uncharmed, if you're the editor, some feel, you're making a value judgment not just on Romeo's would-be girlfriend, but also on the Queen's lifestyle choice. There are some scholars who advocate for the word encharmed, en instead of un, encharmed, which is totally out of left field and it blatantly violates our guidelines, because that's another example of writing a whole new word, even though it's still only a difference of one letter. In the humble opinion of the Shakespeare Showdown show, this distinction doesn't matter a whole bunch, because the metaphor of being charmed by Cupid's arrow is the same as the metaphor for being harmed by Cupid's arrow. The metaphor is being pierced by the arrow, and being pierced by an arrow in the literal sense is a harmful thing. If the Shakespeare Showdown show had to pick one, I suppose we would pick unharmed, because the metaphor is something that's literally harmful, and being struck by Cupid's arrow, while not necessarily being a bad thing, can feel quite harmful. So, to recap the possible differences we've discovered so far, we have smoke raised versus smoke made. Both are valid. We prefer smoke raised from the Q1. We have urged versus purged, and only purged is valid. And we have uncharmed versus unharmed versus encharmed. Only unharmed and uncharmed are valid, and we prefer unharmed from the Q1. This tangent is now over. With that tangent over, let's move on to the 2009 Shakespeare's Globe performance of the play. Here we have Adetomiwa Edun as Romeo in the middle of the frame, with Benvolio in the green clothes on the left side. First, part 1.
He has much to do with hate, but more with love. Why then, oh, brawling love, oh, loving hate, oh, anything of nothing first create. Oh, heavy lightness, serious vanity, misshapen chaos of well-seeming forms, feather of lead, bright smoke, cold fire, sick health, still waking sleep that is not what it is. This love feel I that feel no love in this.
So this version has good energy. Romeo has a nice quick pace, which is a more traditional pace. Nothing major is missing. No issues to complain about at all, in fact. So let's move on to the second part. This is the second part.
Griefs of mine own lie heavy in my breast, which thou wilt propagate, have it pressed with more of thine. This grief that thou hast shown doth add more grief to too much of mine own. Love is a smoke raised with the fume of sighs, being purged, a fire sparkling in lovers' eyes, being vexed, a sea nourished with loving tears. What is it else? A madness most discreet, a choking gall and a preserving sweet.
Once more, no major problems. Notice the words smoke raised from the Q1. This version, as we noted in round 1, is not averse to employing the Q1. And they even go further than the BBC did, because not only do we get smoke raised by the fume of sighs, which is from the Q1, but in the line before that we get the line, this grief that thou hast shown, where most versions have that line as this love that thou hast shown, which is from the Q2. And usually, even in versions that use smoke raised, such as the BBC, which we heard, the previous line will still be this love from the Q2. But this version, the Shakespeare's Globe, takes both this grief and smoke raised from the Q1, which is consistent, so they get points for consistency. And actually, the Shakespeare Showdown show appreciates this a lot, because it's nice to have a version that takes the initiative to follow the Q1 and to follow it consistently, despite the fact that the Q1 is considered by most to be the inferior version. Actually, because of the fact that the Q1 is considered by most to be the inferior version, they still chose to follow it, which is a good thing. As we move on to part 3, we find another example of this consistency. Not only do we get unharmed, which is from the Q1, instead of uncharmed, we also get Cupid's childish bow, which is from the Q1, as opposed to love's weak childish bow. Most scholars strongly dislike the way it is here, because of the fact that it's two different references to Cupid so close together. And the Shakespeare Showdown show actually agrees with this. We prefer it the other way too, the more common way, with the line, love's weak childish bow. The reason why they're doing it like this, it's obvious now, is out of loyalty to the Q1 text, which is a deliberate direction that they've chosen. To be clear, the Shakespeare Showdown show doesn't prefer the Q1 text to the Q2 text. We, like most people, prefer the Q2, notwithstanding the aforementioned preferences for smoke raised from the Q1 and unharmed from the Q1. Those are two minor outliers. The Shakespeare Showdown show believes that the best version of the play is to take the Q2 text as a starting point and then to pepper in some preferred and valid switches from the Q1 text, such as smoke raised and unharmed, which is what the Globe play does. The difference being that the Globe version just peppers in more from the Q1 than we would pepper in from the Q1. Is that clear? Let's listen to how this sounds.
I aimed so near when I supposed you loved.
A right good markman, and she's fair, I love.
Well, right, fair mark, fair cuz, is soonest hit.
Well, in that hit, you miss. She'll not be hit with Cupid's arrow. She hath Dian's wit, and in strong proof of chastity well armed, from Cupid's childish bow, she lives unharmed.
So this is well directed by the director, well performed by the performer, Adetomiwa Adun, well managed by the textual manager, even if we don't agree with every single thing, and there are no disfigured lines. I'm happy to say that this, ladies and gentlemen, this is how it should be done. Therefore, the 2009 Shakespeare's Globe stage play will not be an elimination nominee. It escapes elimination nomination. Moving on to our next contestant, which is the 2013 Broadway version. This is what the dialogue looks like for the first part. All three parts in this version are going to be completely unabridged. This version of the play actually gives us, in a certain sense, the opposite of what the Stratford version gave us. The Stratford play cut out a lot from this scene to save time for other areas. This version, the Broadway, will spend its time in this scene while making sacrifices elsewhere, and as a result, it will end up being about a half hour shorter in length than the Stratford. So let's try to enjoy what they give us here. This is Orlando Bloom as Romeo. This is the first part.
Here's much to do with hate, but more with love. Why then, O brawling love, O loving hate, O anything of nothing first create? O heavy lightness, serious vanity, misshapen chaos of well-seeming forms, feather of lead, bright smoke, cold fire, sick health, still waking sleep that is not what it is. This love feel I, that feel no love in this.
Okay, let's go ahead and move on to the second part. This is the second part.
Griefs of mine own lie heavy in my breast, which thou wilt propagate to have it pressed with more of thine. This love that thou hast shown doth add more grief to too much of mine own. Love is a smoke raised with the fume of sighs, being purged of fire, sparkling in lovers' eyes, being vexed, a sea nourished with lovers' tears. What is it else? A madness most discreet, a choking gall, and a preserving sweet.
Moving on to part 3 with Romeo and his motorcycle. This is part 3.
I aimed so near when I supposed you loved.
A right fair markman, and she is fair I love.
A right fair mark, fair cuz is soonest hit.
Well, in that hit you miss.
Pause. So we have a well-placed helmet here, which a couple of guys in the previous episode could have used, if you recall. Continuing.
She'll not be hit with Cupid's arrow, she hath Dian's wit, and in strong proof of chastity well armed. From love's weak, childish bow she lives uncharmed.
Okay, so what do we have to say about this? They made the inconsistent combination of smoke raised from the Q1 and uncharmed from the Q2, which is the same thing that the BBC did. But that by itself is nothing too egregious. The biggest problem here is probably the motorcycle. Not because it's an anachronism. We're fine with that. We've already seen helicopters in this tournament. But the motorcycle is very awkward. We didn't show it, but Romeo actually rides his motorcycle onto the stage when he enters the scene here. It's very loud. It takes up too much time. It's just too much motorcycle. The 2013 Broadway play we will make our 4th elimination nominee. Moving on to the 2018 Royal Shakespeare Company play. Romeo here will be played by Bally Gill. This is what the dialogue looks like, and this is what it sounds like, the first part.
Here's much to do with hate, but more with love. Why, then, oh, brawling love, oh, loving hate. Feather of lead, bright smoke, cold fire, sick health, this love feel I, that feel no love in this.
So we have a few lines missing, including a few missing oxymorons, which isn't ideal. Heavy lightness, for example. Let's move on to the second part and see what that looks like. Here we have the same 4 lines missing that the BBC removed, plus a couple others. So let's listen to this.
Love is a smoke made with the fume of sighs, being purged, a fire sparkling in lovers' eyes, being vexed, a sea nourished with loving tears.
So they at least included the most important lines, smoke and purged, but they're still cutting out a lot. We're missing 3 whole rhymes now, breast and pressed, shown and own, and discreet and sweet, which isn't ideal. As for part 3, this is what we have. Let's listen.
I aimed so near when I supposed you, love. Well, in that hit you miss. Shall not be hit with Cupid's arrow. She hath Diane's wit, and in strong proof of chastity well armed. From love's weak childish bow she lives uncharmed.
So having heard all 3 parts, what can we say? It's a little heavier abridged than we would like, but they deserve credit in 2 ways. First, they aren't disfiguring any lines, which is a positive. And second, they are keeping the best lines. In the first part, they leave intact the long string of oxymorons, including bright smoke, cold fire, sick health. And in the second part, they leave the love is a smoke line. So they decided to remove a bunch, but they didn't remove any of the most important lines, and they didn't disfigure any lines, and they didn't bring out a ridiculous motorcycle. So, for these reasons, I'm going to make an executive decision and say that the 2018 Royal Shakespeare Company play will not be an elimination nomination. It passes, but it's close. It's not as good as the Globe version, but it does pass. But it's close. It's on very thin ice moving forward. And now we will move on to our final category of Romeos, starting with the 1936 MGM movie. Romeo here will be the famously, notoriously, 43-year-old Leslie Howard, who will be our oldest Romeo. His age was in fact important enough that it is included as a footnote in the Norton Complete Works 2nd edition, which was the edition I used in college. I will tell you that with these movies, things are going to get a lot more choppy. First of all, let's look at the first part, shall we? The entire first part is missing. So, in lieu of that part, I will show another part from Romeo and Benvolio's conversation, which actually includes an interesting maneuver. When Benvolio first sees Romeo in this scene, he says, "Good morrow, cousin," and Romeo says, "Is the day so young?" And Benvolio says, "But new struck 9, hence why the crickets were inappropriate." So far, this is exactly what they're supposed to say, but then Benvolio in this version says, "And here I hit it right, or Romeo hath not been in bed tonight." Let's listen to this.
Tomorrow, cousin. Is the day so young? But new struck 9. And here I hit it right. Our Romeo has not been in bed tonight.
This line actually isn't Benvolio's line, at least not traditionally. This is the line that the friar says to Romeo in Act 2. But here they give it to Benvolio. They just wanted to switch things up, I guess. We'll give it a pass because, 1, Benvolio isn't the one under the gun here, Romeo is. 2, it's mildly interesting. And 3, the newly created line, "But new struck 9, and here I hit it right," while being a Frankenstein mashup of Benvolio's words and the friar's words, actually has 10 total syllables in it. So I think they deserve credit for that. However, they're still robbing us of all of Romeo's oxymorons, which is what we should have been looking at instead of this, so that is still a transgression. Let's move on to the second part and see what we can get from Romeo here. We are starting with "Love is a smoke."
Love is a smoke raised with a fume of sighs. Being purged, a fire sparkling in lovers' eyes. Being vexed, a sea nourished with lovers' tears. What is it else? A madness most discreet, a choking gall and a preserving sweet.
So at least they kept the best lines in, and at least they aren't disfiguring any lines. They seem to constrain themselves to chopping off whole lines at a time, similar to the 2018, which they unfortunately do in large amounts, which isn't ideal, but it's something. The third part being further proof of this. This is what it sounds like.
And in strong proof of chastity well armed, from love's weak childish bow she lives unharmed.
So after having seen and heard all of this, what is our verdict? We are going to make this version an elimination nominee. There are positives here. They keep the best line, love is a smoke, and the cutting and pasting that they do, they seem to do with care. And unlike the 2013 Broadway play, which inconsistently combined smoke raised with uncharmed, this version combines smoke raised with unharmed, both from the Q1, same as the 2009 Globe version did, which deserves at least one extra credit point. Moving on to our next contestant, which is the 1968 Franco Zeffirelli movie. This is going to be a much easier decision. This is absolutely going to be an elimination nominee because this version contains exactly one line from all three parts of our analysis. It contains the line, "Here's much to do with hate, but more with love," from the first part. So let's go ahead and listen to the one line that is included. Get ready so you don't miss it. I'm actually going to throw in one bonus line from Benvolio just to let the music reach its conclusion, because the music is the only good thing happening here. Anyway, here it is.
He has much to do with hate, more with love.
Soft, I will go along.
So this version doesn't include the best line, love is a smoke. It doesn't contain any foreshadowing. It doesn't contain any rhymes. It doesn't contain any oxymorons. And it doesn't contain any classical allusions. So this is an elimination nominee. Thank you for nothing, Franco Zeffirelli. Moving on to our final contestant in our introduction of all 9 Romeos. Here we have Leonardo DiCaprio in the 1996 Baz Luhrmann movie. And this is what the text looks like. Let's listen to how this goes.
Heard it all. Here's much ado with hate, but more with love. Why then, O brawling love, O loving hate, O anything of nothing first create? O heavy lightness, serious vanity, misshapen chaos of well-seeming forms, feather of lead. Dost thou not laugh?
So here Benvolio cuts Romeo off mid-rant, leaving us with only a partial sequence. This version, unfortunately, also omits the entire second part of our study, including the love is a smoke line, which definitely isn't good. Let's skip ahead to the third part and see what we have here. Here we have another partial line. This is the same partial sequence that the BBC version gave us, which leaves us hanging after Cupid's arrow. So this is going to be an elimination nominee for sure, but let's at least listen to it to make it official.
I aimed so near when I supposed you loved.
A right good marksman, and she's fair, I love.
A right fair mark fair, cuz, as soon as hit.
Well, in that hit, you miss. She'll not be hit with Cupid's arrow, nor by the encounter of assailing eyes.
The one positive thing that I'll give this version is the billiard shot. When Romeo says, "In that hit you miss," Benvolio scratches the cue ball up from off the pool table surface, and Romeo catches it. Which brings us to bad idea time. I actually think that this maneuver is doable on stage as part of a live performance. Getting a cue ball to jump off the table like that is a fairly simple trick. You can do it pretty reliably with a little bit of practice. I think it would be interesting to see that done on stage, mostly just as a callback to this movie. I think it would be really cool. Another thing you could do while we're brainstorming is you could possibly maybe have Romeo and Benvolio playing darts on stage, and Benvolio could throw a dart, miss the dartboard, and have Romeo catch the dart. To be safe, you need some sort of prop dart, like a dummy dart, maybe from like a magic show or something. Anyway, this version is simply missing too much, so it's definitely an elimination nominee. And so, having met all 9 Romeos, we are left with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 elimination nominees in total. Only 2 versions aren't in danger of elimination after this analysis. The 2009 and the 2018. And the 2018 is on thin ice. Not the best showing by our 9 Romeos under the pressure of a strict analysis. Now it may seem, with 7 of 9 contestants being sentenced to the possibility of elimination, that we may have been overly strict in our treatment of Romeo. As I said before, it is strict, but there was good reason for that. The reason is because it was only during our analysis of Romeo that we were able to make elimination nominees. That won't be possible during our analysis of Juliet. I didn't mention that, but it's the case. Whichever contestant gets eliminated in this round, they will be eliminated because of the errors committed by Romeo. And the reason for that is because our analysis of Juliet is going to be very, very different. Our analysis of Romeo was, by design, very strict, and it was also very technical. It was very rational. We did things like count the number of syllables in a line. It was very, some might say, left-brained. It was very, some might even say, masculine. As we consider the character of Juliet in the 3rd scene of the 1st act, we will take the opposite approach. We will consider Juliet, or should I say, we will attempt to consider Juliet in a way that is more, shall we say, sensitive, more, shall we say, delicate, maybe more, shall we say, feminine. We will not be concerning ourselves with what words are included and what words aren't included. First of all, it would be pointless to do that anyway, because the lines that we'll be studying will be all exactly the same in all 9 versions. Juliet, in every single version, will say the exact same words. So, we are forced to analyze Juliet in a different way regardless. So we can forget about the number of syllables in a line, and we can also forget about the differences between the Q1 text and the Q2 text. Thank goodness. None of that will matter now. So how are we going to do this? Well, we will focus instead on things like nonverbal communication, things such as movement and body language, etc. We will attempt to analyze the mysterious, sometimes hard to define, sometimes almost impossible to define subtleties of Juliet's communication. This is very tricky territory, both in this analysis and in real life. But as far as our analysis is concerned, it's very tricky territory because unlike the strictly rational exercise that we did with our 9 Romeos, where all we had to do was count the number of syllables in a line, for instance, the things that we are going to consider with Juliet can be much more subjective. In other words, they can be more open to interpretation. This is why we won't be making any elimination nominees during our Juliet analysis. Juliet, instead, is going to have a very specific task. I mentioned before, Romeo's use of the word purged would be repeated later in the play. The place where it's repeated is in Act 1, Scene 5, right after he kisses Juliet for the first time. After he kisses Juliet, Romeo's very next line is, "Thus from my lips by yours my sin is purged." Why do I bring this up? Well, let's consider what we have so far in round 2. What we have are a bunch of Romeos, 7 to be exact, who have found themselves in an awful state of what we may call purgatory. Shakespeare's Showdown show Elimination Purgatory. It will be the mission of Juliet, each Juliet, to rescue her corresponding Romeo from this terrible state. She will be able to do this if and only if she can demonstrate something special. If she cannot demonstrate something special, well then her Romeo may very well be in danger of being permanently eliminated from this tournament. What qualifies as something special, you may ask? Well, let's dive right in and find out what our various Juliets have to offer. Starting with, where we started before, the 1976 Thames TV movie. This is going to be the third scene in the first act. This scene takes place at the Capulet house. The characters in this scene are Juliet, Lady Capulet, who is Juliet's mother, and Juliet's nurse. In the part that we're going to examine closely here, what's happening is Juliet's mother is proposing marriage to her daughter, meaning that she's proposing that Juliet marry a man named Paris, aka County Paris. And where we'll start listening, Lady Capulet will be reciting a long list of Paris's virtues, mainly that he's rich. The end of Lady Capulet's speech looks like this. After Lady Capulet says the line, "By having him, making yourself no less," the nurse will interject with a one-line commentary about men making women bigger, meaning they impregnate them. And then Lady Capulet will ask Juliet a direct question, which is, "Speak briefly, can you like of Paris love?" To which Juliet will respond, "I'll look to like if looking liking move, but no more deep will I endart mine eye than your consent gives strength to make it fly." These three lines will be all that we need, and the text that is shown here is exactly what will be spoken by Juliet in every version. So, we'll go in the same order as before, starting with the 1976 Thames TV movie. This is what Juliet looks like here, played by Anne Hassan wearing a blue dress. Lady Capulet is in the green. Let's listen to how this sounds, starting with Lady Capulet.
That book in many's eyes doth share the glory, that in gold clasps locks in the golden story. So shall you share all that he doth possess, by having him making yourself no less.
No less, nay, bigger. Women grow by men.
Speak briefly. Can you like of Paris love?
I look to like, if looking liking move. But no more deep will I endart mine eye than your consent gives strength to make it fly.
This version, as will be apparent in contrast with the other versions that we'll see, is a very submissive reaction by Juliet. Juliet is very sweet, very innocent, and, as I say, very submissive. The good thing about a sweet and innocent Juliet, like in this version, is that later in the play, after she loses her innocence and becomes more strong-willed and independent, it will give her a longer character arc. So starting from a place that is sweet and innocent isn't necessarily a bad thing in that regard. Although, having said that, long character arcs aren't the only thing that can make a story interesting. A story can be interesting with characters that are simply interesting at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end. Having said that, we will go ahead and say that what we are hearing here isn't anything special. It's not the something special that we are looking for. Trust me, we'll know it when we see it, and it isn't here. So this Romeo will remain in purgatory. Next, we have the 1978 BBC Juliet. Here, Juliet is facing away from the camera on the right side. Lady Capulet is on the left side, and the nurse is in the background in the middle. By the way, if you don't remember which Romeo each of these Juliets corresponds with, don't worry about that. We will see Romeo and Juliet together plenty in later episodes in this showdown. For now, we have 7 Romeos in purgatory and 7 Juliets trying to rescue them. Anyway, let's listen to this. This is Rebecca Sire as Juliet, starting with Lady Capulet again.
That book in many's eyes doth share the glory that in gold clasps locks in the golden story. So shall you share all that he doth possess, by having him making yourself no less.
No less, nay, bigger. Women grow by men.
Speak briefly. Can you like of Paris love?
I'll look to like if looking liking move, but no more deep will I dart mine eye than your consent gives strength to make it fly.
Madam.
This version, like the last one, is a very basic version. It's functional, it's serviceable, it's a little faster paced than the Thames. I will say that Juliet here is slightly more assertive than the Thames Juliet. Is she sweet? Yes. Is she innocent? Yes. Submissive? Yes. But not as sweet, innocent, or submissive as the Thames. The first part is a little more assertive and confident, I think it's fair to say. Actually, let's hear them back to back. This is the Thames again.
I look to like, if looking liking move, but no more deep will I dart mine eye than your consent gives strength to make it fly.
And this is the BBC again.
I'll look to like if looking liking move, but no more deep will I dart mine eye than your consent gives strength to make it fly.
I think the BBC Juliet is a little more assertive and confident. But again, we aren't seeing or hearing anything special. Not yet. So the BBC Romeo remains in purgatory as well. Our Juliets are now 0 for 2 in rescuing their Romeos. Moving on to the 1992 Stratford play, the first of our stage performances. This will be Megan Follows as Juliet. Let's listen to this version, starting with Lady Capulet.
So shall you share all that he doth possess, by having him making yourself no less.
No less, nay bigger, women grow by men.
Stop. Notice. Even before Juliet says anything, notice how she reacts to the nurse's joke. As the nurse cackles maniacally, Juliet is horrified. Let's continue from the top.
So shall you share all that he doth possess, by having him making yourself no less.
No less, nay bigger, women grow by men.
Speak briefly. Can you like of Paris love?
Stop. Notice the change in position. When Lady Capulet is lecturing to Juliet, Lady Capulet is in a high position and Juliet is in a low position, seated on the couch. When it's Juliet's turn to speak, Juliet is now in the high position and Lady Capulet is on the couch. Let's start this again from the top.
So shall you share all that he doth possess, by having him making yourself no less.
No less, nay bigger, women grow by men.
Speak briefly. Can you like of Paris love?
I'll look to like if looking liking move, but no more deep will I dart mine eye than your consent gives strength to make it fly.
Notice, yet again, the hug between Lady Capulet and Juliet. Notice Juliet's arms. Lady Capulet is embracing Juliet, but the embrace is not reciprocated. This is absolutely brilliant. So far, we've already pointed out 3 things that have set this version apart. Let's take a moment now to carefully consider what Shakespeare is doing here when Juliet gives her answer. Let's think about what she's saying exactly. Juliet's mother is seeking Juliet's consent to marry County Paris. She plainly asks, "Can you like of Paris love?" Juliet's response is, "I'll look to like if looking liking move, but no more deep will I endart mine eye than your consent gives strength to make it fly." What is Juliet committing herself to? She commits that she won't love Paris any deeper than what her mother permits. But that's not a concern that her mother has, and it's not an answer to her mother's question, and it isn't what her mother came in search of. Her mother isn't worried that she's going to love Paris too deeply, but Juliet answers as if that's what her mother is worried about. Juliet is only committing that she won't endart her eye more deeply than Lady Capulet's consent gives strength to make it fly. Who cares? That's not a big commitment at all. That's a commitment that I myself can make right here and now. In fact, I'll do it. I now go on record that I will not endart mine eye more deeply to County Paris than Lady Capulet's consent gives strength to make it fly. There, I did it. I haven't committed myself to anything, and neither has Juliet. I suppose that possibly if Juliet did fall madly in love with Paris, and then her mother, for some unexpected reason, rescinded the proposal that they marry, then Juliet might, in that case, be in a pickle. In that one unlikely scenario, yes, she would be inconveniently bound by a promise she made. In that one unlikely scenario. So, I ask, if Lady Capulet wants Juliet to consent to go with Paris, and Juliet commits to nothing of the sort, to virtually nothing at all, why then does Lady Capulet react the way she does? She reacts as if she has received the commitment that she wanted. It's because she's not paying close enough attention to Juliet's words. She's taking Juliet's obedience for granted. Now, the words in this scene are exactly the same as the other versions that we saw. But in this version, you can hear Juliet's careful, horrified is also a part of it, which only puts her under more pressure, but careful and confident navigation through this sticky situation. She can't commit to marriage because that would be insane and horrifying. The audience, by the way, is all on Juliet's side here. Even the Elizabethan audience 400 years ago was on Juliet's side, no different than us. They don't want Juliet to be arranged into some purely politically advantageous marriage. That's nothing modern. But Juliet needs to appease her mother somehow, to buy herself some time at the very least. So she gives her mother a commitment, just not the one she was asking for. Another thing that Megan Follows does here is she puts a little something extra on the if. Let's listen to that part again.
I'll look to like if looking liking move.
If looking liking move. As a general guideline, speaking of general guidelines, shrouding your commitments in a lot of conditional if statements is always a smart move. So, Juliet's response to her mother isn't supposed to be merely submissive, which we've seen. Nor is it supposed to be the opposite, which would be merely assertive. Her response is best when it's a little submissive, a little assertive, and a lot of subversive. And the audience needs to be in on Juliet's careful navigation here. It's okay if it's a little obvious. This is the something special that we're looking for. This Juliet gets the extra credit. In 3 lines, she has now saved the 1992 Stratford Festival Romeo and the entirety of the 1992 Stratford Festival play from Shakespeare Showdown show Elimination Purgatory. Well done. Very, very well done. Moving on to the 2009 play. Now, remember our Romeo from this version already successfully evaded Purgatory, so there's no pressure on Juliet here. But we'll show her nonetheless for the sake of introducing her officially and to hear how she says these lines. Here we have Ellie Kendrick as Juliet, and actually we're going to do something a little bit different this time. With this version, as well as with the next version, we're going to rewind a little bit and include a little bit more of Lady Capulet's speech. This time starting with this precious book of love. Let's listen to this.
This precious book of love, this unbound lover, to beautify him only lacks a cover. The fish lives in the sea, and 'tis much pride for fair without, the fair within to hide. That book in many's eyes doth share the glory that in gold clasps locks in the golden story. So shall you share all that he doth possess, by having him, making yourself no less.
No less, nay, bigger. Women grow by men.
Speak briefly, can you like of Paris, love?
I'll look to like, if looking liking move. But no more deep will I endart mine eye than your consent gives strength to make it fly.
Madam!
Alright, well, like I said, this Juliet, as a Showdown contestant, isn't under a lot of pressure, because this wasn't one of our elimination nominees, and Romeo wasn't in purgatory. And that's probably a good thing for Romeo, that he wasn't in purgatory. Let's just leave it at that. Lady Capulet in this version is a version of Lady Capulet that is very, shall we say, bubbly? Like she's kind of an airhead. The actress here is Miranda Foster, and a bubbly, airheaded Lady Capulet is a very common and perfectly valid way to do it. I wanted to point it out because we are about to see another Lady Capulet that is much different, which is the Lady Capulet from the 2013 Broadway play, our next contestant under consideration. Here we have Condola Rashad playing Juliet, but once again, I want to pay attention to Lady Capulet as well, who is played by Rosalind Ruff. Juliet is in the white dress, the nurse in the purple apron, and Lady Capulet will be in a maroon red dress. Once again, we'll start with this precious book of love.
This precious book of love, this unbound lover, to beautify him only lacks a cover. That book in many's eyes doth share the glory that in gold clasps locks in the golden story. So shall you share all that he doth possess by having him, making yourself no less.
No less? Nay, bigger. Women grow by men.
Speak briefly, can you like of Paris love?
I'll look to like, if looking liking move. But no more deep will I endart mine eye than your consent gives strength to make it fly.
So the interesting thing about Juliet's response here is that she does this thing where she goes up in pitch at the end of her lines. With the three words move, eye, and fly, she raises her pitch. Not unlike the smoke of love that is raised by the fume of sighs, she raises the pitch of her voice as if she's asking a question. Also, we've been discussing the levels of submissiveness or assertiveness of the various Juliets. But here we have a Lady Capulet that is noticeably more strong-spoken and assertive. And it's interesting to have a Lady Capulet that is more of a match for Juliet. Let's listen to this whole exchange one more time.
This precious book of love, this unbound lover, to beautify him only lacks a cover. That book in many's eyes doth share the glory that in gold clasps locks in the golden story. So shall you share all that he doth possess by having him, making yourself no less.
No less? Nay, bigger. Women grow by men.
Speak briefly, can you like of Paris love?
I'll look to like, if looking liking move. But no more deep will I endart mine eye than your consent gives strength to make it fly.
I think it's interesting. I'm not totally sure what's happening exactly. I think what's happening is with a stronger Lady Capulet, Juliet is in more of a pickle here than the other Juliets were, because this Juliet's mother isn't as much of a gullible airhead as some of the others, which may be unfair, but that's life, in the words of Frank Sinatra. So the bar here is higher for Juliet, and I think the raise in pitch is Juliet's way of trying to get up over that bar, and I'm not sure it's working. I think the results here might be inconclusive at best. Remember what we said about the Stratford performance. Juliet should be a little submissive, a little assertive, and a lot of subversive. I feel like Juliet here, with the tone of voice that she takes, is rebelling against her mother perhaps a little bit too strongly, and Lady Capulet isn't being appeased in the slightest. Pay attention to Lady Capulet's reaction.
But no more deep will I endart mine eye than your consent gives strength to make it fly.
Madam, the guests are come. I beseech you follow straight.
We follow thee. Juliet, the county stays.
The words, as Shakespeare wrote them, are duplicitous. So what Juliet says will be duplicitous whatever the tone is. The question then becomes, should Juliet's duplicitous words be spoken in a compliant tone or in an uncompliant one? Condola Rashad is saying them in an uncompliant one, I would say. But doesn't it make more sense to say duplicitous words in a non-uncompliant tone? In other words, a compliant tone, thus making them more duplicitous in effect? Again, this Juliet is in a tough spot, because her mother is less of an airhead. If we think of this scene as a contest between Juliet and Lady Capulet, I think Lady Capulet possibly wins, or it's a draw at the very least. I actually think she overshadows Juliet by a little bit, which means, unfortunately, that our 2013 Broadway Romeo, which was Orlando Bloom, if you remember, remains in purgatory. If only it was the job of Lady Capulet instead of Juliet to rescue Romeo. Romeo might be in better shape. Moving on, let's look at the 2018 Royal Shakespeare Company play. This version, like the 2009 Globe version, is in no need of redemption from purgatory, but we'll look at it anyway for the sake of introducing Juliet, and we did say it was on thin ice. So let's see what this Juliet does. This is Karen Fishwick playing Juliet. Juliet is sitting on the stage, Lady Capulet is in the chair, and the nurse is standing behind Lady Capulet. This is what it looks like.
This precious book of love, this unbound lover, to beautify him only lacks a cover. So shall you share all that he doth possess, by having him making yourself no less.
No less, nay bigger. Women grow by men.
Speak briefly. Can you like of Paris love? I'll look to like, if looking liking move, but no more deep will I endart mine eye than your consent gives strength to make it fly. Madam.
Okay, this might not look like much at first glance, but there's a lot that we need to talk about here, and we're going to go on at least 2 different long tangents. So get comfy. This version of Juliet might actually be our best version, although Megan Follows was pretty good. First of all, we have an extremely independent Juliet, which is good. But she's not independent in the sense that she's determined to beat her mother in a contest. She's independent in the sense that she almost couldn't be bothered at all by what her mother is saying. She casually goes and gets a dress and starts putting it on as her mother is speaking. Very, very loud body language, that is. Also, there's something very important going on in this dialogue that we haven't even brought up yet, but it's pretty important. And that is the fact that Juliet's word move is actually supposed to rhyme with Lady Capulet's word love. When these 2 lines were first written by our author, the words move and love did rhyme, because move in those days was pronounced muv. But they don't anymore, because of the natural evolution of the pronunciation of words over time. They drifted apart and the rhyme deteriorated to the point that it stopped rhyming. And because the two words no longer rhyme, and you know they're supposed to, it's highly annoying and very awkward, and it makes it almost unbearable to listen to that they don't rhyme. And it's all you can think about that they should. Let's go back once more to the 1976 Thames TV version, and let's listen to how this sounds, knowing that the two lines are supposed to rhyme. We know they're supposed to rhyme, but they don't, and this is how it sounds.
Can you like of Paris love?
I look to like, if looking liking move.
So this is highly annoying, I think, because first of all, the lines don't rhyme, but also Juliet says her line as if it rhymes. Juliet emphasizes the word move as if it rhymes with love, but it doesn't. Let's listen to it again.
Can you like of Paris love?
I look to like, if looking liking move.
She's emphasizing move, and she's saying it as if it rhymes with love. So how should the awkward situation be handled? Well, one thing you can do is you can perform the whole play in original pronunciation. That would be a drastic measure, but it would work. By the way, the main proponent for original pronunciation, or OP as it's called, is one Mr. David Crystal. I personally am not a fully converted follower of Mr. Crystal, although I think original pronunciation is interesting. I'm happy that Mr. Crystal is out there advocating for it, and I support him pushing for what he believes in. However, I don't believe all the claims he makes. For instance, he claims that original pronunciation is easier for Americans to understand, but I'm an American and I don't necessarily agree with that. But like I said, it's interesting, it's important to know about, and I'm happy someone is out there pushing for it. But since it's not something employed by any of our contestants in this showdown, we won't say it's a necessary solution to solve a few corrupted rhymes here and there. And there are a handful of instances of awkward non-rhymes in this play. In Act 2, the friar says, "For this alliance may so happy prove to turn your household's rancor to pure love." Prove is supposed to rhyme with love, and it doesn't. But there are other solutions to this, and the 2018 Royal Shakespeare Company play offers one such solution. Instead of doing what the Thames Juliet did, which was the worst thing you could do, saying it as if it rhymes when it doesn't, Juliet here says it like prose. She says it nonchalantly, rushing through it, immediately starting the next line. Let's listen to this and pay attention to how much she doesn't emphasize the word move, and how quickly she starts the next line, starting with the word but. Let's listen.
Can you like of Paris love? I look to like, if looking liking move, but no more deep will I endart mine eye than your consent gives strength to make it fly.
This is an effective solution to the awkward, non-rhyming situation. This is some deft maneuvering by Juliet under the pressure of her mother, and it's also some deft maneuvering by the Royal Shakespeare Company around an awkward spot in the text. This is the Royal Shakespeare Company after all. Now, switching gears, there's one more thing that needs to be brought up here, and that is the striking physical resemblance that we see between Juliet and the nurse. Now, we know that Juliet's relationship with the nurse is much stronger than Juliet's relationship with her own mother. It's made obvious earlier in this scene when Lady Capulet dismisses the nurse to speak to Juliet privately, only to call the nurse back immediately. So that's not a fringe fan theory, nor is it some fringe fan theory the reason why Juliet has a stronger relationship with the nurse than she does with her own mother, which is because it was the nurse who raised her, including nursing her as a baby. This fact is described plainly by the nurse earlier in this scene. It's also plainly described by the nurse that she, the nurse, thinks of Juliet as her own daughter, in no small part because the nurse had a daughter whose name we know was Susan, that was the same age as Juliet, who the nurse sadly informs the audience died when she and Juliet were both babies. All of this is described plainly. What this play did was cast a Juliet with red hair, fair skin, and a nurse with red hair and fair skin, and a Lady Capulet with black hair and tan skin, who was also, not to be rude or anything, but who was also noticeably skinnier than both Juliet and the nurse, which leaves us, the audience, no choice but to infer the only possible inference, which is, and this is a fringe fan theory, that it was in fact Juliet, the Capulet baby, who died when Susan and Juliet were both babies, and that the Capulets, being much wealthier and more powerful than the nurse, replaced their dead baby Juliet with the nurse's living child Susan, and raised Susan, the nurse's living child, as Juliet, their daughter. As far as we're concerned, that's the only possible inference to make, given what we're seeing here. Anyway, with that fringe fan theory over, let's continue with our work. We have 3 movie Juliets to consider, which we'll get through relatively quickly, so we can wrap this bad boy up. First, the 1936 movie. This is Norma Shearer as Juliet. This version actually doesn't have the nurse's interjection, but let's listen to this and hear how it sounds.
Speak briefly. Can you like of Paris, love?
I look to like if looking liking move. But no more deep will I endart mine eye than your consent gives strength to make it fly.
So we have a very meek Juliet once again. This is definitely in the category of Juliets who begin the play very submissive and then grow into a stronger, more independent role as the play progresses, which is an enjoyable experience. The bow and arrow is a nice little use of prop, although it might be a little bit too literal, and I say that fully aware that I already hypothesized for darts to be thrown on stage. Anyway, this contestant was in purgatory, and it will remain in purgatory. Similar to some of the other ones, it's just a little bit too basic. Not enough here to rescue Romeo. Next, we have the 1968 Franco Zeffirelli movie, which you remember gave us a grand total of 1 line from Romeo. Now, this is a little bit out of order, because normally the servant barges in after Lady Capulet's question, and in this movie it happens before. No reason, just switching it up as far as we can tell. Maybe it puts more pressure on Juliet to give an answer more quickly. Anyway, let's go ahead and listen to this.
Madam! Madam! The guests have come, supper served up, you called, my young lady asked for...
We follow. Speak briefly. Can you like Paris, love?
I look to like, if looking liking move. But no more deep will I endart mine eye, than your consent gives strength to make it fly.
I think this version, is fair to say, is inconclusive at best once again. It's certainly not good enough to save the 1968 Romeo from his deep, deep purgatory, but the music is really nice, so I'll give it points for that, but it's not enough to redeem Romeo. One more really quick idea that I just want to throw out there. At the end of this scene, as we've seen, a servant comes into the room and says, "Madam, the guests are come. Supper served up, you called, my young lady asked for, the nurse cursed in the pantry, and everything in extremity. I must hence to wait, I beseech you, follow straight." I think it would be really funny if this was abridged down to just say, "Madam, the nurse cursed in the pantry," and that's the entire controversy that the servant can't wait to tell Lady Capulet. The servant bursts into the room, screams, "Madam, the nurse cursed in the pantry," and then runs off in a panic. I think that would be funny, especially since the nurse is with Lady Capulet, so it makes it like the servant is telling on the nurse. Just an idea. Finally, the 1996 movie. This is Claire Danes as Juliet sitting on the bed. Lady Capulet is in front of the mirror. Let's watch this.
So shall you share all that he doth possess, by having him making yourself no less.
Nay, bigger. Women grow by men.
Speak briefly. Can you like of Paris's love? I'll look to like, if looking liking move. But no more deep will I endart mine eye than your consent give strength to make it fly.
Madame?
So this version is very strong and interesting in its own way. Does it have what it takes to rescue Romeo from purgatory? Well, this is probably the closest call that we'll have to make. Here's the thing. There is something there, and it's not something mysterious or hard to define. I'll tell you exactly what it is. It's Juliet's eyebrow. Watch her left eyebrow. She raises it like the smoke of love being raised by the fume of sighs. She raises her eyebrow when she says move, which we know is a key word. Let's listen to it again and watch her left eyebrow.
Speak briefly. Can you like of Paris's love? I'll look to like, if looking liking move.
Her eyebrow to me seems to be acknowledging the awkward rhyming problem. Juliet is guilty of emphasizing the word move, just like we said she shouldn't do, but she's almost emphasizing it in a way too much that's as if to say, yes, I acknowledge that this is an awkward non-rhyme, but we're not going to run and hide from it. Maybe I'm imagining things at this point, but to me it sounds like Juliet here is deliberately putting a little extra hot sauce on the word move, and her eyebrow, it seems like it's rebelling, almost as if on its own accord, either against the awkward proposal of the mother that Juliet marry Paris, or the awkward non-rhyme that Claire Danes is emphasizing when she shouldn't emphasize it. I think Juliet's delivery here is potentially in the perfect sweet spot where she's not being entirely submissive, but also not being entirely assertive. Her eyebrow certainly seems to have a huge problem with what it's hearing. What do you think? Have I finally lost it? Is this what I get for trying to get in touch with my feminine side, being reduced to scrutinizing the seemingly rogue free will rebellions of one of Juliet's eyebrows? All right, look, I think Juliet's reaction here is perfectly fine, and it's a beautiful reaction, notwithstanding emphasizing the word move. However, I cannot, in good conscience, award any extra credit for it. Certainly not without feeling as though I am rewarding something that is probably a product of my own imagination. If Condola Rashad and Olivia Hussey's reactions were inconclusive at best, then we have to say this version is probably inconclusive at best as well. Therefore, I am constrained to deny the 1996 movie any redemption, meaning that our 1996 Romeo, which was Leonardo DiCaprio, remains unredeemed and in purgatory. By the way, speaking of Condola Rashad and eyebrows, look at Condola Rashad's eyebrows when she says these lines.
I'll look to like if looking liking move. But no more deep will I endart mine eye than your consent give strength to make it fly.
She can't raise them up any farther on the word move because they're already as high as they can go. They're both fully raised the entire time. She is really trying to get over that bar. In conclusion, it looks like out of 7 Romeos that we had in purgatory, only one Romeo was able to be successfully purged from his sins, and that was the 1992 Stratford Festival Romeo, played by Anthony Simolino, redeemed by Megan Follows as Juliet. So where does that leave us? After all this, we have 6 versions of the play that are deserving of elimination. We won't eliminate all of them because we only eliminate 1 per episode. However, the 5 versions that survived this round will continue to be elimination nominees at the beginning of the next round. The next round in the Romeo and Juliet Showdown will be a special sudden death round between the 5 elimination nominees that will remain as elimination nominees after today's elimination. So they are going to need to be purged from their sins one way or another, in the words of Debbie Harry. So who's going to get the axe in this round? They all deserve to be eliminated, no matter how arbitrary our determination is. We will, nevertheless, pick our elimination selection with perfectly sound and valid reasoning. We will eliminate the 2013 Broadway play starring Orlando Bloom as Romeo and Condola Rashad as Juliet, and the reason will be mainly because of the motorcycle. The motorcycle is unforgivable, and I'll explain the full reason why right now, which I didn't before. The full reason is this. Orlando Bloom here is actually 36 years old, 36 and a half to be precise. Now, there's nothing wrong with being 36 and a half years old. I'm not trying to make fun of him. 36 and a half years old isn't even the oldest version of Romeo that we have in this showdown. But what did they do with their 36 and a half year old Romeo? They dressed him up in distressed denim jeans from the mall for pants, and a hooded zip-up sweatshirt with sunglasses, and, most commented on of all, by many people long before me, they gave him a motorcycle. Why is all this a problem? Well, we believe that these were measures that were taken to mitigate the specter of a 36-year-old Romeo in an attempt to bring his age down to something younger looking than 36. But what happened was it had the exact opposite effect. What these measures did instead was raise his age up to an age that looks even older than 36, like the smoke of love being raised by the fume of sighs. And in terms of motorcycle purchasing categories, would put him in the midlife crisis / empty nester category of motorcycle purchasing, which would make him our oldest Romeo. Again, there's nothing wrong with buying and riding a motorcycle in that category, but the story we're dealing with here is the story of Romeo and Juliet, and Orlando Bloom isn't playing Juliet's father, he's playing Juliet's soon-to-be husband. And Juliet, in the words of her father, is yet a stranger in the world. Now, we're going to talk more about that in greater detail in a later episode. But for now, let's just leave it at that. I think a 36-year-old Romeo is doable. But if you're going to have a 36-year-old Romeo, you would be better served to avoid the denial and simply own it. Give him an outfit that is more along the lines of the pink collared button-down shirt that Anthony Simolino had in the Stratford version. Leslie Howard was in his 40s, but Leslie Howard wasn't wearing distressed blue jeans from the mall. So on the one hand, with this 2013 Broadway version, we've got a Romeo who looks closer to Lady Capulet's age than to Juliet's age. And on the other hand, we've got a Lady Capulet who, remember, was played by Rosalind Ruff in a maroon red dress, who looks like she could be younger than Orlando Bloom. And in fact, she is younger than Orlando Bloom by about 9 years. So this is starting to feel more like the story of Romeo and Lady Capulet than the story of Romeo and Juliet. Romeo and Lady Capulet would be an interesting play, but that's a play for another day. Our subject today is supposed to be Romeo and Juliet, and in this version of Romeo and Juliet, I think my compass needle is getting a little mixed up. So, the 2013 Broadway play is eliminated. Now, what do we have to say about the 2013 play upon its elimination? This play received some pretty lukewarm reviews in its day, but it did exceed our expectations, which were admittedly low because of the lukewarm reputation that preceded it. So what did we like about it? Well, there's a lot that we liked about it. Lady Capulet, who we've already singled out, is excellent, even though it risks overshadowing Juliet a little bit. Lord Capulet, Juliet's father, who we didn't see at all yet, played by Chuck Cooper, is also excellent. Unfortunately, however, we don't have time to study everything, and Lord Capulet wasn't our subject in this episode. I think this version is definitely worth the price of a theater ticket. The original music in this play, which was performed on the cello by a cellist named Tahira Whittington, is very well done. It's very enjoyable. But once again, for the reasons laid out, this will be our elimination for this round, and our second elimination in this tournament, and it will no longer be in contention for the Romeo and Juliet Championship. Now, before we conclude today's episode once and for all, there is one more thing we would like to do. In the analysis we did, we only had one Juliet that was able to rescue her Romeo from purgatory, as we called it. That was the 1992 Stratford Festival play. What we want to do now is to show one additional clip from that play, which is from Act 1, Scene 5, when Romeo and Juliet first speak to each other and when they kiss for the first time, when Romeo says, "Thus from my lips by yours my sin is purged." This is an absolutely critical part of the play, and there are lots of great versions of it. The 1936 version is really lovely. The 1968 version is wonderful. The 1996 version with Leonardo DiCaprio and Claire Danes is super, super cute. But because the Stratford version was the only version in which Juliet purged Romeo from his sins in our analysis, this will be the only version that we will watch, and it's a perfectly lovely version in its own right. Remember, this happens at Lord Capulet's ancient feast. Romeo will speak first. Their dialogue looks like this, which famously is a perfect 14-line sonnet before they kiss, with perfect 10 syllables per line and perfect rhyming. And we'll listen to a couple of extra lines. This is Anthony Similino as Romeo and Megan Follows as Juliet from the 1992 Stratford Festival play, Act 1, Scene 5. Let's listen.
If I profane with my unworthiest hand this holy shrine, the gentle sin is this: my lips, two blushing pilgrims, ready stand to smooth that rough touch with a tender kiss.
Good pilgrim, you do wrong your hand too much, which mannerly devotion shows in this. The saints have hands that pilgrims' hands do touch, and palm to palm is holy palmer's kiss.
Have not saints lips, and holy palmers too?
Aye, pilgrim, lips that they must use in prayer.
Oh then, dear saint, let lips do what hands do. They pray. Grant thou, lest faith turn to despair.
Saints do not move, though grant for prayer's sake.
Then move not, while my prayer's effect I take. Thus from my lips, by thine, my sin is purged.
And have my lips the sin that they have took?
Sin from my lips? Oh, trespass sweetly urged, give me my sin again.
You kiss by the book.
All right, having heard and witnessed that, there is actually one more reason why the 2013 version deserves to be eliminated today, and that's because of Juliet's line that Romeo kisses, quote-unquote, by the book. In the version that we watched, I agree, Romeo does kiss by the book, which is how it should be. The kiss in the 2013 play, however, in our humble opinion, isn't quote-unquote by the book at all. We won't show it, so you'll have to investigate that on your own time, but it's not by the book. It goes on for a little too long, for one thing, and we'll just leave it at that. On the next episode of the Shakespeare Showdown show, we will be skipping forward in the play to the famous, the immortal orchard scene, the so-called balcony scene. This is possibly Shakespeare's most famous scene, which will be a heavy responsibility. But nevertheless, in the Capulet orchard, we will have a very important problem to discuss. We have 8 contestants remaining in the tournament, 5 of which face sudden elimination. The next round of the tournament will be a special sudden death round between these 5 contestants, and these 5 only. Competing will be the 1936, the 1968, the 1976, the 1978, and the 1996. The orchard scene. Sudden death. Next time on the Shakespeare Showdown show. Thanks for watching.